Hail TCB faithful, and welcome to yet another episode of the Runback, the obscure fighting game series that's only remembered because of the inclusion of Steel Angel Kurumi characters. And as always, we're here to ask the question, was this game actually any good? This time by naming a thing after a random German word that I'm sure we'll be switching the pronunciation of.
By 1998, the 3D fighting game craze was reaching its absolute peak. Tekken 3 was completely dominating arcades and home consoles alike, proving that players wanted full 360-degree movement, aggressive juggle combos, and flashy graphics. This market was so hot, lots of strange companies not typically associated with the genre wanted to stick their fingers in the proverbial pie.
One of those strange companies, believe it or not, turned out to be RPG giant Squaresoft, who teamed up with a rookie dev team called Dream Factory, a studio literally founded by one of the co-creators of Tekken and Virtua Fighter, Seiichi Ichi. They quickly became something of Square's go-to team for fighting games, and through their partnership they created their first game, Tobal No. 1, in 1996, quickly followed by its sequel, Tobal 2, in 1997.
Now, both Tobal games sold remarkably well, but there's something of a asterisk here, a catch. The first game came attached with the pre-release demo disc of the highly anticipated Final Fantasy VII. Western and Japanese fans alike openly admitted they brought the game just to play a few minutes of Final Fantasy VII, which is sad because Tobal No. 1 is actually a really good game. When Tobal 2 came around, while it was critically acclaimed, it didn't grab the same sales numbers as the first game, selling fewer than 100,000 copies in the US, which was obviously due to it not having a Final Fantasy demo to help inflate the sales numbers. This caused the game not to even be localized for the West.
Tobal was built from the ground up as a console game, meaning it missed out on the massive arcade ecosystem where Tekken and Virtua Fighter built their competitive communities. Both Square and Dream Factory changed their entire philosophy, choosing to pivot towards arcades first, in an attempt to be taken seriously as a Tier 1 fighting game developer. So, instead of making Tobal 3, they decided to create a fresh title. First, they made sure to build what would become Ehrgeiz directly on a Namco System 12 arcade board, the exact same hardware running Tekken 3. But once again, they couldn't just push a game on that alone, so they returned to an old marketing strategy that worked for the first Tobal game, but expanded.
How do you guarantee people care about a brand new arcade IP? Simple, stop hiding Final Fantasy on a separate demo disc and put Final Fantasy directly into the game. Instead of gambling on Tobal 3, Square used Ehrgeiz to cash in on the explosive global success of Final Fantasy VII. And it turns out that slapping Cloud, Tifa, and Sephiroth on an arcade cabinet marquee was an instant marketing cheat code that no original Tobal character could ever match.
It worked a little too well, and this little marketing hook consumed the game's entire identity. When you ask anyone about Ehrgeiz today, the first thing they will probably say is that game with the Final Fantasy characters in it. And this might be a little shocking to you guys, but there's a whole game attached to all that. So let's stop the history and take a look at this thing. We're Team Crossbody, and where's Ehrgeiz? God bless the ring any good? This is one of those rare moments on the Runback where even after playing a couple hundred matches, we have to admit we still aren't entirely comfortable with playing the game. Ehrgeiz wants to be a lot of things at once.
Yeah, it's a 3D fighter like Tekken, an arena fighter with free range movement. It has special moves that work kinda like Smash Bros, and the stages can feel weirdly Power Stone-ish. No, none of this is particularly cohesive.
Don't get us wrong. Over our time with Ehrgeiz, we definitely started to understand it more and more. Our play got tighter, our decisions got better, and despite the oops, all berries design philosophy this game seems built around, there is a logic to everything. It just feels like we never fully got the hang of any of it. Ehrgeiz feels like arguing with somebody who's wrong, but in a way where you can see exactly how they got there.
So for this one, we're going to skip our usual system by system breakdown and talk about the game more broadly. Ehrgeiz has a lot of major mechanics and a lot of tiny mechanics, and we're not trying to scoop all that shit up without a dustpan. Besides, we're inevitably going to miss something, and somebody in the comments is going to say, "You didn't talk about interruptions," and we'll be like, "Yeah, because we never figure out how to use it consistently," which unfortunately applies to about 3 or 4 mechanics in this bitch.
I hate to bring this up because it might confuse people more, but did anybody here play Toe Ball number 1? Don't raise your hand. I know most of you didn't. Luckily, you only need the context for the first game because Toe Ball 2, number 2, never left Japan.
You know what just called Toe Ball 2. You're being a dick on purpose.
Guilty. Anyway, those games came out in 1996 and 1997 respectively, and Ehrgeiz dropped in 1998. My point is that when it comes to the core combat, Ehrgeiz feels like a spiritual successor to Toe Ball. The difference is that it feels like a potential Toe Ball 3 smashed his head, lost his memory, and started living life as Ehrgeiz instead.
This is a 4-button game, consisting of low, high, and a special attack button, along with a guard that handles like 3 different actions at the same time. Holding guard allows you to block low, but it also functions as a crouch, act as sort of a hard lock-on that instantly snaps your character towards the opponent, and if held while moving, turn your character's run into a slower, more deliberate steps like it's Tomb Raider or something.
The more diligent of you might be wondering, how do I block standard attacks? Well, it's simple. Just don't touch anything. The game will automatically guard against anything that isn't a low or a throw. This is typically called passive blocking, and by itself it's perfectly fine. Even games like Tekken 8 still has it as a legacy mechanic, which is impressive considering how hard Tekken 8 tries not to be Tekken. Passive blocking works in Tekken because both players are always focused on each other, and movement revolves around circling your opponent. In Ehrgeiz, we found it a little clumsy because there's also a dedicated guard button, and the game allows players to run wherever they want to. So if you want to block normally, you kinda just have to let Jesus take the wheel. It's something you have to get used to, but it's also a good example of how awkward Ehrgeiz can feel.
But we're not done with the guard button yet, because pressing it alongside the high and low attack buttons will perform a throw. As you can probably tell, that's not the fastest throw input compared to most fighting games, especially when you realize you'll either have to do it while in that weird walking state or while standing completely still, because as far as we know, there aren't any running throws in this game. Are you confused yet? Don't worry, pressing low and high together still does something. That input gives you a mid attack, and if you play literally any 3D fighter, you know mids are kind of important. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying you only get one mid attack. Depending on the situation, that same input can produce different kinds of mids while running, walking, jumping, and so on. Oh, but I'm not finished. Ehrgeiz also features just frame inputs. Landing one during certain strings can alter attack properties entirely. Maybe a string that normally hits high suddenly becomes high mid. Maybe it becomes unblockable. The game gets weird with it.
Something that surprised us revisiting the game is that Ehrgeiz actually has resource management through its special system. This is where a lot of the character-specific quirks live: projectiles, sub-weapons, weird stances, you name it. The interesting part is that instead of traditional fighting game motions, I mean, how would you even do quarter circles in a game like this anyway? Special attacks are tied to meter expenditure. Using a special drains a portion of your gauge. I don't know the exact values, but basic projectiles seem to cost around 10 to 15%, while giant screen covering attacks take considerably more. Some characters can even spend their meter to maintain special states that rapidly drain the gauge over time. Once it's gone, it doesn't regenerate on its own. You have to actively participate in the fight, land hits, take damage, throw people around, you know the drill. One thing Dream Factory got right is that the special button doesn't become completely useless once you're empty. You lose all your flashy stuff, sure, but you're not left with a dead button.
If you're out of juice, every character gets some kind of replacement attack on the special button. It's nowhere near as useful, but at least it's there. Why would you need it? I don't know, but they put it there. Although we don't fully understand every aspect of it, Ehrgeiz also has a surprisingly involved grappling system. Instead of simply Tekken throws with a press of a button like in Tekken, the game treats grabs as a brief clinch state. Or at least that's what we feel like it is. I've never played an MMA game before, so I'm kinda guessing here. When your opponent initiates a throw, your character enters a short struggle animation before getting slammed, but even if you miss the first break opportunity, you're not completely helpless. Once the attacker has secured a grab, they'll still need to input a direction and a button to determine the final throw. If you correctly anticipate what they're attempting, you could counter with a reversal throw your own. So instead of escaping, you completely flip the situation around and slam them instead.
The success rate of breaking or reversing a throw depends entirely on your positioning. Front throws are fully breakable and reversible. Side throws are much harder to break because the window becomes dramatically shorter, and getting grabbed from behind guarantees a throw. Some characters can even transition directly into ground mounts or submission holds. And look, all these systems are pretty cool. Put them together and you'd have yourself a pretty solid Tekken style 3D fighter already. But, as we've kept saying this whole time, Ehrgeiz prioritizes free 360-degree movement above everything else. And honestly, that's where the game starts tripping over itself. But let's take a break from all the mechanics talk and focus on what most people actually gave a damn about with this game: the Final Fantasy characters. Because yeah, that crossover stuff is a huge reason why Ehrgeiz is still remembered at all. Historically, the original arcade version of Ehrgeiz was already well into development when Square decided to bring Final Fantasy VII characters as a late-stage crossover hook. It wasn't part of the original design plan, so much as it was a way to attach the game to something instantly recognizable and boost attention going into release. And when the PlayStation version came out, they expanded on that even further, adding additional playable characters beyond what was in the arcade release. So the console version is really the one most people end up playing and remembering.
Once you actually look at how these guest characters play though, a lot of them are not as unique as you might expect. On the surface, they look distinct, but mechanically, most of them are essentially built as variants of the original Ehrgeiz roster. Their base movesets are often cloned or heavily reused from existing characters, then tweaked with a different animation or properties so they'll fit that Final Fantasy character's identity. And where they do stand out is usually through small adjustments, slightly different specials, altering timing, or a couple unique attacks layered on top of that copy foundation. But the core structure is still very familiar if you played the base roster.
Since Ehrgeiz already had the director/game designer of the first two Tekken games on board, characters like Godhand were already walking homages to that series. So it's pretty funny that Cloud and Vincent are doing fucking laser scrapers and demon massacres, considering they're already clones of Godhand. Ironically enough, everybody's favorite body pillow Tifa, who certainly needs to be in the fighting game, should be the most Tekken-like character out of the group as a designated punch girl, but she doesn't really take that much from that series. Once again, that's more Cloud outside the Buster Sword stance and Vincent. Tifa is quite literally a clone of Claire. Hey, future Final Boost here. I actually misspoke here. Tifa is actually in the arcade version of Ehrgeiz, so technically Claire is a clone of Tifa. I just wanted to make sure, but I mean, it's hot and it got passed somehow. Okay, back to the video. Who, while having several Tekken moves of her own, especially from the Law family, doesn't borrow nearly as much from that series as Godhand does.
With all that said, taking into account what they are, there's not much to say about how they play. We personally never cared much for this crossover, always being more interested in the game itself, but it's strange that the main reason everyone probably picked this game up amounts to a little more than an intelligent reuse of existing assets rather than anything particularly unique. Still, if all you wanted was to see these characters in detailed 3D outside of their battle models, then you are probably more than happy with them being mostly visual overlays. It would take more than a few years before everyone got to see these characters playing 100% like themselves with the Dissidia line of Final Fantasy games, and depending on how you feel about those titles, perhaps even longer. But now, with Tifa representing the series in Street Fighter VI, these two long intertwined franchises, Final Fantasy and Street Fighter, have finally met on a collision course for fun. She'll play so uniquely. She'll drive rush and throw loop. And drive rush and throw loop. You know, fun?
Anyway, where were we?
Oh yeah, the movement. Everything we've talked about so far is important, but none of it is really what make Ehrgeiz Ehrgeiz. The real story is the movement, And yes, the movement is the identity. Ignore quest mode, ignore the mini games, hell, even look past the Final Fantasy guest fighters. All those are gimmicks. At the end of the day, this is a fighting game, and Ehrgeiz is about its movement system. Don't get us wrong, for 1998, G Factory did an impressive job tackling the game built around the question, how do you balance a fighting game when players can run wherever they want? We don't want to diminish how ambitious that is, but for us, running around was shockingly our least favorite part of the fighting system.
The actual act of running around is very slippery and unwieldy. If I had to compare it to anything, I'd say it feels a little like curling. You know, that Winter Olympics sport everybody suddenly becomes an expert on every 4 years? And look, I don't know the first thing about curling, but I do know the objective usually isn't stop wherever the hell you feel like it. But that's kind of what Ehrgeiz feels like. Once you start running, it's surprisingly difficult to stop. There's a noticeable delay before your character actually comes to a halt, which I guess makes sense if you're trying to simulate real-world momentum, but it doesn't make for particularly fun movement. It doesn't help that characters go from 0 to hit jog the instant you tap a direction. That only adds to the feeling that running is happening to you rather than because of you. And it's not like you can just instantly cancel into an attack during a run either. The same delay is still there, so if you try to swing mid-run, your character just attacks in whatever direction you're already committed to. You have to fully pivot first if you want to turn around and hit the other player. Nothing here is a deal breaker, but it doesn't feel particularly polished. When it comes to movement, the game kind of takes on a mind of its own in a few too many moments. And I just want running to feel in my hands. In my hands again. I just want movement in my hands again.
It isn't all bad. You can default to holding a guard button, and that definitely helps corral the controls a bit. But I don't know, running around in general just feels kind of superfluous. And don't mistake this for us thinking that we know better or anything, but just take a second to think about how we explained the game so far. And bonus points if you actually played it. Where does this free running actually comes into play? Sure, you can enable items scattered around the arena, and we did mess around with that for a bit, but items in a 2-player fighting game are always a little awkward. It starts to feel like those moments in a hardcore wrestling match where everything stops and someone's just wandering around looking for a weapon to swing. It breaks the pace. And it's not like your opponent is going to be knocked down long enough for you to casually pick something up anyway. Some arenas also have different elevations, but jumping is a little bit awkward too. Much like attacking, you're still locked into the direction you were running when you committed. So even that freedom doesn't really translate cleanly into the moment-to-moment gameplay. And that's kind of the issue. The unrestricted running sounds like a major feature, but in practice it comes off more like a gimmick than something that meaningfully shaped the core combat.
With that being said, it does help Ehrgeiz feel different from a typical 3D fighter, and it definitely gives it a unique kind of neutral game, and as fighting game players, we usually try to beat games on their own terms. Part of the appeal is figuring out and mastering whatever systems the game throws at you. Those systems are the rules of the game after all. So we're not saying this shouldn't be here or anything like that. At the same time, we'd be pretty hypocritical if we gave this game a free pass just because it's older, while criticizing modern fighters like Street Fighter VI or Tekken 8 for mechanics we don't think serve the game that way. The standard should be the same. Does it actually improve the way the game plays? And for us, that's where Ehrgeiz becomes a little more questionable. But unlike those games, this is 1998, and at the time, there just wasn't a solid blueprint for this kind of arena-based 3D fighter yet. You did have experiments like Psychic Force and then contemporaries like the Strega showing up later that year, but none of it was really standardized yet. Outside of something like Virtua On, Ehrgeiz ends up sitting pretty early in the hand-to-hand arena fighter space. That realization kinda hits you while you're looking back at it.
While this does cover the fighting game side of things, Ehrgeiz has a couple of more surprises outside for what you'll expect, as this is a pretty full-bodied product. This brings us over to the title's quest mode. Okay, so technically it isn't called quest mode, it's a lot more Japanese sounding. The full name is Brand New Quest, The Forsaken Dungeon, and for all intents and purposes, might as well be its own game entirely. Quest mode was additional content added to the PlayStation version of Ehrgeiz. It stars console-exclusive characters Koji Masuda, the archaeologist protagonist of the mode, and his 16-year-old prodigy student Claire Andrews. as they embark on a quest to... Look man, I've played this thing on and off for years as a kid, and I still couldn't tell you exactly what their plan was. The game introduces them, dumps a pile of lore in your lap, and then immediately seems to lose interest in explaining what anybody is actually doing. It doesn't exactly put its best foot forward either, opening with an almost minute-and-a-half text crawl before giving you a little more story and then just kind of dropping you into the game, and the innkeeper explaining that you were found unconscious outside the settlement that serves as the game's main hub. After that, you kind of just run around.
And after all that running around for a bit, that's when you'll realize, hey, this isn't going to be a Tekken Force at all. Quest mode is not some fighting game adjacent beat 'em up side game. It's a dungeon crawler that somehow got packed in with a fighting game. For long stretches, it barely even feels related to Ehrgeiz beyond sharing the same character models and combat engine. You'll be managing equipment, digging through random loot, watching durability values, dealing with hunger, crafting items, upgrading gear, and trying not to get folded by any and everything. Because the game gives you so little context for anything, you'll be getting bodied by both bears and tiny bats. It's all fair here down in the dungeon. The weirdest part of it is that the mode commits to the bit so thoroughly that after a while you stop thinking of it as bonus content. You start thinking of Ehrgeiz as the game that shipped alongside quest mode.
And for how complex the core game is, it's beyond me how quest mode is somehow the opposite. This mode forces a top-down camera into a fighting game engine, making the controls feel extraordinarily clunky. So you'll enter a dungeon, run up to an enemy, get ambushed by more enemies, press buttons on it until it dies, or throws out an untelegraphed hit, repeat. There's no intricate combos, no deep strategy, very little tactical depth to the fights themselves. Just equip stronger pants and either get stepped on or do the stepping yourself.
This entire mode is governed by a strict leveling system, centered around protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, and fucking lipids of all things. Eating the appropriate food in conjunction with the standard killing monsters for EXP will determine how your stats grow. But they also play into another subsystem going on, survival. Okay, maybe that's making it sound a little more complex than it actually is. But just like us normal humans, food not only pads our stats, it also staves off hunger for a little while. So it's not something you can just ignore. Failing to eat not only hurts your stats upon leveling up, but it also slowly drains your HP until you die.
Now, as kids, we thought quest mode sucked. It's very I don't have siblings coded. And through the enlightenment of adulthood, quest mode still sucks. But we can appreciate what they tried to do. Ehrgeiz or Ehrgeiz is already a meaty game on its own, but adding a whole 10-hour action RPG to it was a great bang for your buck. Although it's beyond janky, poorly thought out, padded to all hell with artificial difficulty spikes, there's no denying that overall it was a good choice to include with the game.
Yeah, it's shitty, there's no denying that, but a lot of it is excusable being part of a fighting game at all. I just wish the mode considered that fighting game anywhere in its gameplay. None of the tools or none of the mechanics you picked up while playing the fighting game side of Ehrgeiz transfers over to quest mode, and I just don't understand why. You can keep everything quest mode has while breaking over some of the mechanics from the core game. That way it doesn't feel like so many things are out of your hands, gatekept by stats and equipment, and instead adds a little more of a skill element to the mode, which might make things feel a little more natural. So at this point you may be thinking, okay, we've got a full fighting game, a full dungeon crawler, a crossover roster that half rewrites the rules of who's copying who, surely that's it, right? Yeah, no.
Of course not, because Ehrgeiz also has minigames, plural. As in, someone looked at this already overstuffed PlayStation disc and said, you know what this needs? More unrelated shit. The wild part isn't even the fact that they exist, it's that some of them are actually kind of good.
Which is annoying, because you expect all of them to be like the racing one. So let's start there. The racing minigame is not it. On paper, it sounds fine. You're sprinting through a course, competing against another player, trying to reach the finish line first. Simple enough. In practice, it's like the game forgets what genre it's supposed to be halfway through. Because for reasons that only make sense in some parallel universe, the camera and the movement system stays locked onto your opponent like it's still a fighting game. So instead of just running a normal race, you're constantly orbiting this character like you're in a weird 3D custody battle over directional control. You try to adjust your paths, but the lock-on keeps snapping you back into this awkward alignment where you're not really racing forward as much as circling each other at a speed like two confused satellites. And it gets worse when you try to correct your direction, because the moment you break alignment, the camera starts fighting you harder than your actual opponent. So what should be a straightforward sprint ends up feeling like you're wrestling the concept of forward momentum itself.
It's one of those mini games where you could tell the idea was probably fine in a meeting room. Like, hey, Sonic R, but with Ehrgeiz characters, sure. But then it gets implemented in a system that still thinks locking onto your opponent is the default state of existence, and everything immediately falls apart.
But then somehow they swing wildly in the other direction.
Because the beach games? Yeah, those are actually good.
Which is offensive on a philosophical level.
The beach games do exactly what proper minigames should do. Take the pressure off the core system and strip everything down to simple inputs. It's mostly timing, mashing, and a couple of clean reactions. Nothing fighting game adjacent, nothing trying to be clever.
These collection of rapid-fire mini-games understand something Ehrgeiz itself constantly forgets. Not everything needs to be a fight, and I mean that both figuratively and literally. There's a simplicity to them that just works. And you're not fighting the camera, you're not fighting the control scheme, you're just doing the thing. And it's weirdly relaxing in a game that otherwise feels like it's always one bad input away from turning into an argument.
And then there's Panel Battle, which I don't know who needs to hear this, but Panel Battle is kind of the best one.
It's basically the opposite of the racing game. Instead of everything feeling overlocked and over-tethered, Panel Battle just gives you a clean rule set and lets it breathe. You're flipping panels, controlling space, reacting to your opponent. It's simple, readable, and somehow has more mechanical clarity than quest mode.
I just don't understand how the racing game ended up the way it did. If you aren't going to make a minigame fully automated like the beach games, then don't drift so far away from what the core game understands. Panel Battle is basically just Ehrgeiz movement stripped down to a grid with one decision layered on top of it.
I'm hard pressed to even dismiss this one as padding, because it's not. It's legitimately well designed, which makes you wonder how this ended up on the same disc as the racing minigame that feels like it's actively fighting your controller inputs.
Oh, there's also a survival mode? Get in on the fun there too, I guess?
So after all that, where does that leave Ehrgeiz? Because I don't think it's strange to say that it pretty much falls in a strange place for us. This game is packed with genuinely cool ideas. The fighting system has more depth than most people probably remember, the grappling mechanics are surprisingly involved, the special meter gives characters a lot of personality, even the Final Fantasy crossover, while not nearly as unique as its reputation suggests, was implemented a lot smarter than we expected.
The problem is that almost every good idea in Ehrgeiz comes attached to another idea that makes it harder to enjoy. The mechanics are interesting but awkward. The movement is ambitious but often feels like it's fighting the player. Quest mode is absurdly ambitious for a fighting game, but it's also clunky enough that we spent half the time wondering if anybody involved actually played it. And the minigames somehow contain both one of the worst things in the package and one of the best.
Ehrgeiz is basically a collection of experiments. Some of them work, some of them absolutely do not. But what makes the game fascinating is that Dream Factory was willing to try all of them anyway. But does it make it a good fighting game?
Let's not stand on ceremony. While the core fighting system is solid, very solid actually, does it really do anything better or different than its competition at the time?
I guess not, man. Outside of the Final Fantasy VII cast, the only other standout thing about the game, at least for us, is the movement. And we don't think it does enough for the game to bring it over the top or anything. But I want to be crystal clear. Ehrgeiz As a fighting game, they not need to be anywhere near as good as it is. All of these strange mechanics definitely could have formed into a much worse game, but for what they're worth, it works. I just think the movement is the one idea that pushes the game from unusual into actively getting in its own way.
But even if the game didn't have free movement and played more like a traditional 3D fighter, it still wouldn't be remembered to any significant degree outside of the said Final Fantasy characters. I mean, look at Tobal. It's respected, but does anyone still talk about it? Well, other than us. So maybe this fate was unavoidable. So let's rank this thing and get out of here.
Gotcha. We fought a little bit on this, but Ehrgeiz, God Bless the Ring, ultimately lands at a C rank. I can say for both of us that this was probably the most head-scratching game we've played yet.
But what do you guys think? Want to complain about how we kept changing the pronunciation of this stupid fucking word? Let us know in the comment section. Make sure to like, comment, hype, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Runback.
Buddy. All right.